Hi everyone, it's your boy Zach, and this is my review of Kong Skull Island from 2017. So, unlike most of my movie reviews, this only took me from like last night till today to watch, and I'm reviewing it like 3 minutes after I finish watching it. And I'm going to start with an analogy. Now, if most people who listen to my channel are from America, but if you're not, you've seen TV shows, you've seen what an American gallon of milk looks like. I know in Canada, you all have bags of milk, and I believe in Europe it just kind of like seeps out of your walls. But we have this plastic jug, and it's kind of weirdly shaped. And there's this phase that every kid goes through at the dinner table, where he or she insists on pouring their milk themselves. And it's always like this slow motion car wreck where you're just like, oh God. If you're the older brother, you're like, it's kind of like the Matrix. It's like, is he going to make the jump? And you're like, nobody makes it the first time. Nobody makes it the first time. And when you spill it, you don't just spill it. It's a freaking meal destroying disaster. It knocks over your cup, which spills out the milk that got in. And then the kid always overreacts, goes the other way, drops the milk gallon on the side. It's going everywhere. Then the dad's grabbing it, but it's a freaking disaster. The whole night is ruined, and that's basically what Kong Skull Island is. Now, it is a beautiful looking movie. In fact, I kept saying, what would director be good at besides directing? Because he has an amazing eye for composition, and action scenes. The ending action scene with Kong versus the Skull Slayer, Skull something, that's awesome. And I was kind of commenting in Matrix. I was like, "Am I crazy, or did like CGI effects peak like 17 years ago? Like, it doesn't seem like they've gotten better." This was the best, large use. Like, at some point, the only thing telling you this is not real is just that these creatures don't exist. Like, it looks real. So the funny thing is that I started. I actually was gonna go see this movie in the theaters. I drove up to the movie theater. I had nothing other to do that day, and I sat there and I just go, nah. Like, I've never done that before. I've never driven to the theater to see a movie and then changed my mind and just left. But I just had this weird feeling. Like, I remember at first, for some reason, when it was being developed. Okay, so first of all, somehow in the last 20 years, Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro, they have become the same person in my mind. Like, I can't separate them. So I was like, Peter Del Toro directed, The Hobbit and this and that. So I was like, so they're in the mix. And then I remember, like, wait, it's some Jonathan Roberts, some guy I'd never heard of. Like, what the hell? I thought this was either Peter Jackson or Guillermo del Toro. Peter Jackson did the King Kong from 2005, and I believe Guillermo del Toro was briefly attached to this, but it wasn't. It was just some guy, not the YouTuber, just some guy. The funny thing is, I ended up looking him up, and his life is way more interesting than this movie. So he's like a cool LA guy, been in the LA scene, and then he decided to go to Vietnam and party there. And then he ended up becoming like a local celebrity. He's actually like the Vietnam travel ambassador. So he's Mr. Cool guy, and then he gets them to film a lot of the scenes from in Vietnam. Traditionally, you would do something like this in Hawaii. So, of course, everyone in Vietnam loves him except for some gangsters. And he gets almost beaten to death in a club. And then, because they're gangsters, everyone's like, hey, sorry you got beat up by somebody, and let's just not talk about it anymore. He goes back to America, and he starts, with this, like, reporter, and because the gangsters are like had split Vietnamese Canadian citizenship, and using everyone's cell phone footage and security footage, and they pieced together who it was, and one of them ended up getting arrested in India, and then I believe the charges, it was for something different, but they tracked him down. And I was like, this is so interesting. And then I went back to the movie. So, very briefly, this is not going to be brief. There are so many. So, my milk analogy is not good in that eventually every kid learns how to pour his own glass of milk. And I feel like there's something missing in this director. This movie is a mess. Every single part, you're just like, why is no one saying something? Now, when I used to watch the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, I would get very frustrated and hung up on, the plot holes, as they call them. And then once I became, a full-time creator, artist, I would see my own readers get frustrated with what they felt were plot holes. But I know why I did it. I did it because I wanted to concentrate on some like emotional moment, just some character moment, and I didn't really care about explaining how this guy has a rocket launcher. He's a bad guy. He got it somehow. And I've gotten better at that because they've made it clear, like, if someone has a rocket launcher, like, we need to know where he got it from. So it's kind of like Chekhov's gun, but it's Chekhov's rocket launcher. It from a certain level of firearm, you're just kind of fine with it. But above that level, they're like, wait, how does he have a rocket launcher? Okay, we really needed like at least a line of dialogue is like, my connection is, the freaking Department of Defense, like something. How? So, but this whole movie's like this. And the thing is, there are no character moments, character arcs to distract from that. The director, who's the decider, and yes, this is a huge budget. I mean, it wasn't actually, it was fairly moderate for as good as it looks. It's 150 million. It made like 550 million. So it made a nice profit of like 100 million. Weirdly enough, there's no call to make a sequel or bring the guy back to do anything. Everyone just kind of like, I think there was a lot of like, whew, at least we didn't lose money. And then they're just kind of moving on to other things. But what I'm saying is there were no character arcs, big emotional moments where you can explain why, that's why he didn't really explain this part, because he was building to this other thing. This thing builds to a fight, and it's a cool fight, but we get 2 hours of nothing characters, interchangeable characters who are completely inconsistent from scene to scene. By that I mean they literally will have different personalities, not just scene to scene, but line from line within the same scene. It's looking like there was a script, not a very good script, but a script. And then the director let people kind of vamp and ad-lib, and then he would just put in whatever he felt like. So you have, what is it, John C. Reilly, he was this World War II guy who was stuck on the, island for 30 years, and like his freaking character is completely inconsistent. And then at the end, spoiler, he gets to see his, wife and son again, and it's supposed to be this nice moment, but like, it's like finding out Elmer Fudd just like reunited with his long lost love. Like, I don't see him as a person. He's a cartoon. I'm not really worried about his emotional, So the story is, it starts in World War II. Japanese and American fighter pilots crash on an island, and then they see King Kong. Now, the difference is they're kind of talking about the, kaijus, giant monsters, and they do tie in atomic testing, but they're not saying that created them, but it might have made it so Kong never stops growing, and he seems to have a really super long life. So then we cut to 1973 because that's cool. I mean, that's what made me almost go see it. When the trailer said King Kong again, I'm like, I don't care. It's like something Vietnam soldiers is like, all right, cool. I got my attention. So they introduced the Vietnam. I'm just going to call them army guys because I'm sure that's what the director called them. So I will say this in defense of the director in the movie. There is not a mean bone in this director or the movie's body. Like, it is meant to entertain, it's meant to be fun, and there's a general good nature about it, but like, it's stupid in a way that gets annoying. You're introduced to what you think is some regular, army, platoon. Then you find out it's actually a helicopter squadron. Then everyone gets knocked down and they're basic grunts. And it's this weird, you start noticing that everyone's an officer. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of this is not militarily accurate, but what I'm just saying is like everyone was just whatever each scene needed to be. If you remember the thing, do you remember webisodes? They're like, oh, we're going to do some webisodes. It's like 5 minutes. It's on, you go to a website and then they'll collect them. This felt like, okay, so it was 2 hours. Webisodes were usually like 5 minutes. So I got to do math in my head. 12? It was basically 24 webisodes. Every 3 minute to 5 minute section kind of worked. But when you put it all together, it doesn't work. I mean, where are we going to go? There was no reason for this expedition. There was a Russian satellite that was going to go over the island and possibly spot the monsters, but we find out they spend most of their time underground anyway. It's extremely dangerous. A guy discovers the Vietnam War is ending suddenly, and so they're like, oh, we got to do this, and there's a timetable, and there's going to be a Russian satellite. I've never seen a worse setup for why a bunch of people have to go to something that's incredibly dangerous. Then they go there, and they make it through, and then they immediately run into Kong, and I mean they run into him. They discover him, and instead of just flying away, they all decide to attack him and get within one arm's distance, so he just kills like half of them. Although it's weird too, because they show this ship, and I swear I saw like 4 helicopters on it at one time, and then they got this whole massive, armed, freaking, I don't know air wing terminology, a bunch of helicopters. All of a sudden, they got like 18 helicopters. Like, where did these other ones come from? So most of them get knocked down. Amazingly, everyone that was introduced in previous scenes survives, and then a bunch of people die. Like, it's a cool scene, except for you're like, why don't they just fly away? Also, I understand freaking out the first 30 seconds and shooting a 7.62 machine gun at King Kong, who's as big as the Empire State Building in this one, but you do realize this is not even like a mosquito bite to him. Like, all you're doing is making him get angry and knock you out of the sky or grab you after you fell and kill you. So then the survivors are down. They're in 3 different groups. And again, this is just one of those things where it's like, okay, so we're 40 minutes in. Nobody really has any personality. There's weird things like they recruit, I don't remember this guy's name, the guy who plays Loki. This was supposed to be his big move to be like, kind of auditioning to be the next James Bond. And it's pathetic. He has no muscles, and he's obviously flexing whenever he's holding a rifle. He's supposed to be this badass, SAS guy. Oh, completely unconvincing. Funny thing is, his whole thing is to rescue people. And at one point, like almost at the end of the movie, he finally is told to go rescue someone. He's like, no. And then someone's like, isn't that what you do? And he just makes this little sour face like, oh, yeah. So there's 3 groups, or it's one guy by himself and then 2 groups. The problem is there's not even like a basic leadership thing from the director. Say, okay, so we're in a jungle, but there's different types of jungle. If we have 3 different groups, one of them, they need to be on the hills and mountains overlooking the valley floor. One needs to be in the thick jungle, and one needs to be like along the riverbank. No, everyone's just going through the jungle. So you get about 30 minutes of that where you have no idea where anyone is. Then we meet John C. Reilly, and this thing, he could have been like this emotional thing that like held it together, and instead, literally, it's like within a scene, it'll be like a couple lines that are obviously from the script, then a couple that are obviously ad-libbed that do not match thematically, emotionally, anything with the previous lines, and then we go back to the script lines. Like, it's a mess. There's a secret society that doesn't really do anything, and then when he leaves, like, he forgets to say goodbye, and then it's supposed to be this emotional thing, but it's like, what an asshole. I'm sure they fed you and helped you, and you're just gonna like pull a SpongeBob, I'm a head out. And then they get into this vehicle that's like, one guy's like, this is it? And he's like, me and my buddy spent 6 years making this, and it looks like shit. Like, there's no top to it. And of course, later, a minor character gets like picked off by some pterodactyls, and then everyone who was just chilling like they were already safe, they go, there was nothing we could have done. I can name a couple of things. Before you left, first of all, you've been here for 28 years. You only spent 6 years on this craft. Spend 6 years more. Put a top on it. Put some spikes out that will impale any creatures. Like, you have John C. Reilly. Like, you're in dangerous territory. So the rest of it is a bunch of soldiers acting like, I don't know, IT guys, who are playing paintball or something like that. Like nobody seems to be that worried if they die or if anyone else dies. Several times someone dies and someone just says like, well, there's nothing we could have done. There's like a minor character who's like 50 who hangs out with a 20-year-old soldier, and at one point, even though he's just like, I'll sacrifice myself, and then it doesn't do anything, you're like, was that supposed to be like gallows humor, or was it tragic, or like that guy was in a lot of the movie. He was probably shooting, principal photography for like 3 months, and that was the end. That was it. There's all kinds of weird, dumb military things I could do 20 minutes. I'm not going to waste your time on that. But I just became, since the visuals were so, I'm talking about like the compositions, especially for some shots, are so good. And the action scenes were so good. And I was like, what can we get this director on that's not him directing? Because he doesn't have any understanding of character arcs or even being in the editing bay and just saying, we need a consistent performance. They're like, yeah, I like John C. Reilly's ad libs, but they don't match, being alone for, away from, Americans for 28 years. There's a funny part where he's ad libbing. He goes, I don't know if I'm talking out loud or in my head. But then that's like something someone who hasn't spoken, his native language for 28 years would say. But then like he's pretty normal, and then he's actually the voice of reason. And then he's crazy. Oh, geez. Like, you got to take this milk jug away from him. He's not ready for it. I would say hit him back down to the minor leagues. Have him do something. First of all, he needs a really good script. Really good. And this was not a really good script. Second of all, he needs less characters. Oh, God, there were so many characters. It was stupid. So many, like, nothing burger characters in this. I don't know. Honestly, I feel like he should be running like an effects house. Like you give him the action scenes and you help like develop the look. Like the look was really cool, but he cannot handle characters or actors or actresses or arcs or 3-act structure, anything. Oh my gosh. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'm still working on Aliens. Bye.